Hello YouTube, it's me again. Hi, how are you? Right, today this is going to be part 2 of the CRP-5 videos, and today we're going to be talking about distances, specifically conversions of one distance to another. And that's one of the main things that this side of the CRP-5 is used for, and that's the ability to convert one distance to another. If we look on the outside of the scale, we can see that we've got a number of distances marked out. We've got kilometers, we've got meters, yards, we have got feet down here, and we've got nautical miles and statute miles. So let's briefly talk about how to convert each one of these to the other, and then I'll give you a couple of examples just to show you how to do it. Now, similar to the previous video, one thing that's really important, one thing I teach my students over and over again, is the concept of gross error checking. You can never gross error check enough. There's no point in using the CRP-5 to just spin this around, line it up with something and go blah 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 blah, right, there, got my answer, there you go, that's it. In order to really understand what you're doing, you need to have an understanding beforehand of what the answer is going to be. For this reason, you need to understand your conversions. Now, when I'm teaching in class, it's much easier to do this because I can teach my students from day one about conversions, and I give them handouts on how to convert one unit to the other, both when I'm teaching general navigation, CRP-5 or physics. I obviously can't do that in this video. I'm going to have to expect you to somehow already know what your conversions are. And the reason that these conversions are important is because, very similar to the previous video, you can't just go ahead and use the CRP-5 to convert nautical miles into meters without having an approximate understanding of what the answer should be to start with. So let's start with converting something like feet to meters. All of you training to be pilots should be fully aware of what the conversion of feet to meters are. There are 3.28 feet in a meter. It's a number you really should be very familiar with. You can approximate it to about 3 for gross error checking, but there are 3.28 feet in a meter. And let's just prove that. If we stick the number 1 under the meters, and then we simply spin this upside down and have a look under there where feet are, you'll see that there are 3, 0.1, 0.2, and that's 0.3. Just under 3.3, there are 3.28 feet in a meter. What about kilometers to feet? Well, this is actually quite an easy one. In actual fact, the CRP-5 is already set up for this. We've already got 1 kilometer set up. See, if I spin this around, this can mean both meters or kilometers, simply because there are 1,000 meters in a kilometer. Therefore, if I spin this upside down, you can see that if there are 3.28 feet in a meter, then there obviously must be 3.28 times 1,000 feet in a kilometre. So 1 kilometre equals 3,280 feet. What about feet in a statute mile? How many feet are there in a statute mile? Well, in order to do this, what we need to do, now unfortunately I can't spin the CRP-5 round 90 degrees, which is a shame, but what I can do, if we spin the one round 2 statute miles, now on this virtual CRP-5, there should be an arrow like there is there. It's missing on this for some reason, but I know it should be here. It should be pointing just to the right of this M. So if I put the 1 where the statute miles mark is, and again all I have to do is look for feet, that's going to be down the bottom somewhere, and I can see here under feet that 1 nautical mile is equal to 5,152,53. Now I know from calculations that there are 5,280 feet in a statute mile. Now you've got to have some kind of understanding. I know that a statute mile is approximately, very approximately 40% bigger than a kilometre. If there are 3,280 feet in a kilometre, then I know there's going to be around about 5,000–6,000 thousand feet in a statute mile. So when I read this again, similar to the previous video, as long as you've got some understanding of order of magnitude, when I read this off, I can read that as 5,000, not 500 or 50,000, for example. So 5,100, 200, just under 5,300, and I happen to know that there are 5,280 feet in a statute mile. What about feet in a nautical mile? Now this one's probably more important than statute miles, because in aviation, let's be honest, we don't really use statute miles for anything. There are some aircraft, some older aircraft, PA-28s for example, that do have airspeed indicators that read in miles per hour. I'm not going to lie, I have no idea why. They really should be reading in knots. A lot of airspeed indicators read in both miles per hour and in nautical miles per hour. But statute miles are generally not really used in aviation much. Nautical miles are used very, very regularly. So we've got nautical miles over here on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to turn my 1 to be pointing at the arrow next to the nautical mile sign. And if I see that 1 nautical mile must there be equal to just over 6,000 feet. And again, I just know based on practice and knowing that there are 3.28 feet in a metre and that there are 3,280 feet in a kilometre, and I also happen to know that there are very approximately 2 kilometres in a nautical mile. So I know that 1 nautical mile, when you do the maths, works out to be just over 6,000 feet. So it actually turns out that there are 6,080 feet in a nautical mile, according to ICAO. ICAO are obviously the International Civil Aviation Organization, and they dictate that the distance of 1 nautical mile is equal to 6,080 feet. It's not actually completely exact. It's about 6,076 there or thereabouts, but 6,080 or 6080 as it's often referred to is more than accurate enough. And this is a very, very useful number to remember, because when you're doing calculations involving triangles, trigonometry, Pythagoras, when you're working out distances from airports, rates of descent, as we'll do later on in this CRP-5 course, you'll see that being able to convert nautical miles into feet is extremely useful, for the simple reason that in aviation we generally tend to talk about distances in nautical miles, yet we talk about height or altitude in feet. So understanding how to convert feet to nautical miles is extremely useful. So if there's one of these conversions that you really should remember, and that's feet to nautical miles, which is about 6,080. What about converting meters into statute miles? Again, a very, very useful conversion to know. And I can tell you that the number of meters in a statute mile is 1,609 or 1,610. Close enough. Let's confirm this. We put the 1 onto meters. Oh, actually, no, we don't. I'm lying. I'm completely wrong. We need to put this onto statute miles. Of course we do. So there we go. There's the 1. We put the 1 onto statute miles, and we read off how many meters that's equivalent to. And if we spin this around, we'll see that it's equivalent to just over 1,600. This is the 20 mark, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So this is about 1,610. So again, that just confirms that there are 1,610 meters in a statute mile. Again, the reason this is important is because when you start doing calculations involving the conversion of one unit to the next, it's really, really useful and important to have an understanding of what number you're expecting as an answer. What next? What next? We have meters in a nautical mile. This one is a very useful one as well, mainly because things like runway lengths are usually given in meters. It's one of the only distances in aviation where the unit is used in meters, not in nautical miles, and as a result, being able to convert from meters into nautical miles can be quite useful. So I'm going to convert this number 10, which is obviously a 1, to point to nautical miles, and I'm going to read off the top 1, about 1,850. The actual answer, according to ICAO, is 1,852 meters. So 1,852 meters in a nautical mile. Again, if you then multiply that by 3.28, you'll find that the answer doesn't quite come to 6080. It comes to about 6,076 or there or thereabouts. So the official ICAO units of distance state that there are 1,852 meters in a nautical mile. There are 3.28 feet in a metre, and there are 6,080 feet in a nautical mile as well. What have we got next? Nautical miles to statute miles. Well, you can see from here that there's not a lot of difference between them. We've got the nautical mile arrow here, we've got the statute mile arrow should be there, and there's really not much in it. It's about 15% And as you can see from there, if I've got my number 1 pointing to nautical miles, and I can see that this one points to about there, and you can see from the inside scale that that's 1.1, 2, 3, 4, that's a 5 there, 1.11, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4 and 1, 5. So there are 1.15 statute miles in a nautical mile, and that tells me that a statute mile is smaller than a nautical mile because there are more of them in the same given space, the same given distance. From point A to point B, there's only 1 nautical mile, but there are 1.15 statute miles. Likewise, if you work backwards, what we can do is we can move this to the statute mile line, and we can see how many nautical miles are there in a statute mile. Well, we've already dictated that there are less nautical miles than there are statute miles, so therefore we expect a smaller number. So we have 1 statute mile, and we bring this back to the arrow, and we should see that there should be about 0.8, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86 and 87. So there's about 0.87 nautical miles in a statute mile. Another way to say that is that a nautical mile is 87% as big as a statute mile. Finally, we've got yards. Now, I'm not entirely sure why yards are on here. I don't really know anyone that uses yards on a regular basis, especially in aviation. I don't think anybody uses them, but you can still use yards there to figure out. So if I line that up there, we put 1 there, we can see that 1 yard, 1 meter. 1 meter is about 1.1 yards. So again, that just goes to show you that a yard is smaller than a meter, because in the same given distance from A to B, there's only 1 meter, but there are 1.1 yards. Another way to look at that is if I move that 1 to point at the yards, then I can see that 1 yard is about 0.91 meters or so. Okay, and I do believe from memory, if I'm correct, that 1 yard is about 3 feet, almost exactly. So if I just put that to 1 and I spin this upside down, we can see that that points to pretty much 3, almost exactly. So they're exactly 3 feet in a yard. So now that you understand how to use the outer scale of the CRP-5 to do conversions, which is very simple, let me just give you I think I've got 3 very quick examples just to show you of how we can use this practically speaking. So, first question. You're flying at an altitude, or a height, it's really not important. You're flying at an altitude of 6,000 feet. What is this height in nautical miles? Well, before we start the calculation, one thing that I always teach my students, I'm very strict about, is don't just jump in there. If you're going to use a CRP-5 or you're going to use a calculator, it's not really important. What is more important than anything is that you have a brief understanding before you start the calculation as to what you expect the answer to be. Otherwise, when you finally write down your answer, or you look at the answer on the calculator, or you look at the number on the CRP-5, do you honestly know that the number you're looking at is correct? No, you don't. So let's, before we do the calculation, just have a quick think. The question states we're at an altitude of 6,000 feet. And the question is, what is this in nautical miles? Now I know that there are 6080 or 6,080 feet in a nautical mile. So this means that for 1 nautical mile, there's 6,080 feet. So if I'm flying at 6,000 feet, I'm flying at very nearly 1 nautical mile in altitude. So let's just confirm this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick under the feet unit up there. I'm going to put the number 6 under there. That's about as accurate as I can get it. And I'm going to have a quick look to my right hand side under the term nautical miles. I'm going to see what it tells me. And it tells me that, yep, indeed, this number 1 or 10 here is 1 nautical mile. And as you can see, 6,000 feet is about 0.99 nautical miles. Now, question, does it make sense? Yes, it does. That's exactly what I expected. That's exactly the answer I get. I'm happy. I've got nothing to worry about. I can move on. The reason that this gross error checking is so important is because as long as you have an understanding as to what the answer should be, very approximately, then once you calculate the answer, If you've already got an idea of what you think the answer should be, then if you don't get anything near that answer, then you know straight away you've probably made a mistake. So very quickly do the calculation again, think it through a second time and do it. The problem is that if you're not entirely sure what the conversions are from one unit to the next before you start, the issue then comes that I, as a layperson, could look at this and say, well, this just reads 9.9, so maybe there are 9.9 nautical miles in 6,000 feet. And if I don't know what the conversions are to start with, then I've got no way to check that. I'm just going to read off the number that I read off, which means nothing whatsoever to me. So make sure you know what you're talking about before you start calculating anything. Second question, nice and easy. There's only 3 questions. Heathrow Airport. It has 2 runways, a north runway and a south runway. The south runway, runway 09 right or 27 left, it has a length, according to the UK Aeronautical Information publication, it has a length of 3,658 metres. My question is, what is that in both feet and statute miles? So Heathrow Airport's southern runway is 3,658 metres. What is this in feet and statute miles? Now notice, I'm not going to do anything with the CRP-5 just yet, because what I need to do is a gross error check. So, first things first, 3,658 metres into feet. Well, I know that there are 3.28 feet in a metre, so call it 3, very approximately 3. I've got about 3,500 metres, so I want about 3 times 3.5, well, call it 3 times 3, 9, 10, 11,000, something around about that ballpark. So when I convert 3,658 metres into feet, I'm expecting something, give or take, around about 10, 11,000 feet. So let's do the calculation and figure this out. So we want metres, so let's spin this upside down. Let's go back to the top. I'm going to spin this round, 3,658. So there's 3,5, 3,6, 3,658. It's about there, something like that. 3,500, 3,600, 3,650. So it's going to be about there, lined up with a meters line. And I'm expecting, in terms of feet, I'm expecting something around about 10, 11,000 there or thereabouts. So let's have a quick look over here. It's going to be at the bottom, isn't it? There's feet. What do we get? We get just over 12. So it's about 12,000 feet. I do believe the exact answer using a calculator is about 11,998 feet, but within the accuracy of the CRP-5, this is more than good enough. So we can see that 3,658 meters is about 12,000 feet. Next question was, what is this in statute miles? Now, in order to convert meters to statute miles, I know that there are 1,609 meters in a statute mile. So I'm expecting to do this calculation by dividing 3,658 by 1,609. So 3,568, call it 3,500, divided by very approximately 1,500. I'm looking for something that's going to be around about 2. Something like that. Again, doesn't have to be accurate. I just need to know approximately what number I'm expecting. And if we move this up there and I zoom in a bit, you'll be able to see that, again, we haven't touched this, remember. This is still pointing to 3,500, 658, or as accurate as I can make it. We can see under the statute miles where there should be a line right about here. That's where the line should be. And we get about 2.22467, about 2.27. Now, I've actually done this calculation on a calculator prior to making this video, and if you do 3,658 divided by 1,609, you do indeed get exactly 2.27 statute miles. So 2.27 statute miles, very, very accurate calculation from the CRP-5. Next question, and the last question to make this nice and brief. The tropopause, those of you that understand meteorology will be aware that the vast majority of life that exists on Earth and the vast majority of flying that exists in commercial aviation takes place within what we call the troposphere. At the top of the troposphere, you have what's called the tropopause. Above the tropopause, you then have the stratosphere. Now, meteorological information will dictate to you that on a standard ISA day, that is with the International Standard Atmosphere, the tropopause exists at about 11.2 kilometers high. So my question to you is, if the tropopause exists at 11.2 kilometers, what is this in feet, statute miles, and nautical miles? So, before we do the calculation, let's just stop and think for a minute. 11.2 kilometers, so 11.2 kilometers, 11,200 meters, and I want this in feet. Well, I know that there are 3.28 feet in a meter, call it 3, so I'm expecting 11 and a bit times 3 is going to be just over 30,000. It's going to be over 30,000 feet. Okay, so let's do the calculation quickly. We've got meters and kilometers up there, so let's put 11.2 underneath there. There's 11, 11.1 and 11.2. So 11.2 kilometers is set on the CRP-5, and I want to know, what is this first of all in feet? Well, if we spin this around, I'm expecting something around about 30,000+ feet, and indeed I get 35, 36. This says nearly 37,000. Not entirely sure how accurate that is. I think it should 11.2 kilometers should be about 36,090 feet. It should be just over 36,000. But again, to within the accuracy of the CRP-5, this is saying it's about 35, 36, between 36 and 37,000 feet, which is absolutely fine. I think the answer should be about 36,090 feet in theory. It's a very theoretical number. The height of the tropopause varies every minute of the day all around the world, depending on the temperature, the seasons, and a host of other things. So again, 37,000 feet, which is exactly what we expected. The next question was, what is 11.2 kilometers in statute miles? Well, how can we do this? Well, statute miles, what do we say? We said that there were 1,609 meters in a statute mile, which means there are 1.6 kilometers in a statute mile. So for every statute mile, I've got about 1.5 kilometers, which means for every kilometer, I've got about, what's that? That's about 2/3 of a statute mile. So with 11.2 kilometers, I'm expecting to do the calculation in my head, approximately 11 multiplied, about 11 divided by 1.6. And if you do that calculation, you'll get something around about 6 or 7. So we haven't moved the CRP-5, it's still set up to 11.2 kilometers. And if I now look around to the statute mile line, which is over here, you see statute miles. The line should be about there, and indeed I should be getting around about 6.8, nearly 7 statute miles. So there's 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 6.8 statute miles in a kilometre. And again, just double check it to make sure that you understand that that number is obviously reading off 6.8, not 0.68 or 68. And the last question I asked was, what is 11.2 kilometers in nautical miles? Well, again, we know that a kilometer is 1,000 meters, and 11.2 kilometers is 11,200 meters. We also said that there are 1,852 meters in a nautical mile, and there are therefore 1.852 kilometers in a nautical mile. Now 1.8 is very approximately 2, so we can argue that from a mental calculation point of view, for every kilometre that we have about half a nautical mile, very approximately. We've got about just over 11 kilometres, so I'm expecting to have whatever's about half of 11, which is about 5.5, just over 5.5. And if we look at this under nautical miles, we're reading just over 6. Again, ballpark figure, that's absolutely fine. We did approximate 1.8 to 2, so approximating 5.5 up to 6 is not an issue at all. And in fact, if you do the calculation, 11,200 meters, to get that into nautical miles, you have to divide that by 1.852. You will indeed get something around about 6.04. And again, you can see there's 6.1. This black line there is 6.05, and our line is absolutely spot on, about 6.04. So That is distances on the CRP-5. If I can give you any advice, it would be the following. Learn your conversions. Learn the conversion from meters to feet, kilometers to feet, feet into statute miles, feet into nautical miles, feet into meters, meters to nautical miles to statute miles to nautical miles, and understand what the conversions are before you do any calculation. Always ask yourself the question, does this make sense? Those famous 4 words are very, very useful. Ask yourself the question that you're being asked. Try to understand to the best of your ability what the conversion is. Do a rough mental calculation, also known as a gross error check. Then ask yourself those famous 4 words. Does it make sense? Do the calculation, check it, confirm it. Job done. Any questions? Stick them in the comments, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can with video number 3. Thank you.